Dr. Nelson, the microphone's yours.
Well, Daniela, thank you. Thank you for giving up another evening of your life to MC this event. Thank you. And to you, Chancellor John Hood and Elizabeth, thank you. I regard myself as unworthy of this, but thank you so much, Elizabeth, to you and the committee of the Distinguished Alumni for choosing me for this award, which I regard as being one to recognise all of the alumni of the university and those of us who've tried in our own ways to make a difference to our country and to our world. To all of you here this evening, and particularly the distinguished alumni and the families who love and support you, who have enabled you to come to where you are and what you'll continue to do with your lives. I won't recognise the political figures that are here again, but I love yous all. And I was asked if I would speak to you to give a so-called keynote. If you're wondering what you're in for, when I was Leader of the Opposition actually, and Dean Brown will know what I mean when I say this, my wife and I were on the way to a function one night, and in this tone she said on the way, "Is this going to be a good night, or are you giving a talk?" So, yeah. Well, there's more. So I was asked at one stage to deliver the Chapman oration to Engineers Australia in honour of one of the pioneers of the engineering profession, and so I had 500 engineers and their partners at the Grand Hyatt in Melbourne, and I'd been asked to do this 40-minute oration. I put a bit of research into it actually. I read Herbert Hoover's biography, The Life of an Engineer, the Roeblings and the Brooklyn Bridge, and of course General Sir John Monash. And if you are an engineer, if you've got them in the family, you know they're very serious people. They need to get out a bit. And so I did what I'd been asked to do over this dinner format, and when I sat down, the very earnest Chief Executive of Engineers Australia leaned over and he said, "Dr. Nelson, I do apologise for continuing to eat whilst you began your speech, but your wife said I should enjoy something while you were talking." By the time I finish speaking to you, you'll wonder what on earth it was all about. I was set up in my life by three institutions. My parents, the Jesuits at St Ignatius in Athelston. If you're unfamiliar with the Jesuits, they're a seriously above average intellect militant sub-faction of the Catholic priesthood. They've got their guy at the Vatican, so I imagine they're a bit more relaxed now. And then this university built on that foundation and made me in no small way the person that I am. And anything I have been able to achieve in my life was a product of Professor John Chalmers, Andy Rogers, Rick Burns, a whole range of people, Jim Watts, Liz Cant, and a whole range of people that would be unknown to many of you here. And this university has been very much the hallmark of my life, and everything I have done since I've been only able to do because people with whom I worked who made me look a lot better than I deserved to be. I often say to young people, you don't realise what you're learning when you're learning it. And the most significant ideas and thoughts that will most challenge, change and transform your outlook come when you least expect. And it's often in random moments of quiet revelation. I've learned as I've gone through my life that there are two paradoxes of what I call the human existence. The first of them is that we tend, as human beings that we are, to take for granted those things that are most important to us in our lives. The magic and vitality of your youth, you don't really appreciate until it's gone, forever. Good physical health, emotional resilience, the families who love us give meaning and context to our lives. Australian citizens, whether it's conferred upon us by birth or by choice, affording us as it does political, economic and religious freedoms. We live in a country where faith coexists with reason, free academic inquiry, an independent judiciary and a free press. I've observed that it's tempting from in the relatively comfortable lives that we live, to live in neglectful ignorance of the individual contributions and sacrifices that have been made to make us who we are and give us what we have. Early in 2010, I had arrived in Brussels. I was Australia's ambassador to NATO, the European Union, Belgium and Luxembourg. And I also did the WHO in Geneva, so I was busy. The then US ambassador to the European Union was a man called William E. Kennard Jr. He chaired the Carlisle Group for a decade prior to his appointment. And he came to see me at the embassy about an issue of mutual concern to our two countries. So, as I always do, I left my office, I went out into the foyer to meet him. Kennard was an African American, bearing an uncanny resemblance to his then President, Barack Obama. So we walked into my office, just talking, and then he literally stopped dead, stopped mid-sentence. And he said, "A black man." And I said, "Yes, Bill." And what stopped him was a black and white photograph. It's larger than the size of a standard door, and it goes everywhere with me. As I'm speaking to you, it's hanging in my Westminster office. And I said to him, "Yes, an Aboriginal Australian. His name is Neville Bonner." And I told him the story. I said he was born in my country in 1922. His non-Aboriginal father absconded before he was born. A Yungarra man, he was born to his mother Julia on a tiny little island in the mouth of the Tweed River in northern New South Wales in my country. He was born on that island because in my country in those days, Aboriginal people were not allowed to be in town after the sun had gone down. He grew up in a hollow that had been carved by his Aboriginal grandfather on the banks of the Richmond River in northern New South Wales. And when he was 9, the year before his mother's death, she sent him and his sister to a small school in Lismore. And he lasted 2 days before the non-Aboriginal parents forced him from the school. Neville later said that it was to his Indigenous grandmother Ida that he owed his ultimate success in life, because she had said to him when he was resisting going to school, she said he had to go to school, and he said, "I don't want to." And she said, "If you learn to read and write, express yourself well, and treat people with decency and courtesy, it'll take you a long way." Unlike us, he did one single year of education. He did 2 years of education in a calendar year at Bow Desert School in central Queensland. He then spent a life working as a stockman, a cane cutter, clearing scrub. He spent 16 years on the infamous Palm Island off the coast of Townsville. And then in 1967, he was working as a bridge carpenter in Ipswich when his interest in politics was piqued by the referendum, which, as we know, would seek to, for the first time, count Aboriginal people in the census and allow the Commonwealth Government to pass laws in relation to them. In 1971, he stood before the members of the Liberal Party of Queensland, seeking their preferment to go to Canberra as a senator, the first Aboriginal person to ever do so. And he said in part, "In my experience of this world, there are two things of which we are in greater need: human compassion and understanding." He served 11 years in the Australian Senate. He endured condescension. He was patronised. He faced overt racism. Parents in Queensland schools would not allow the Aboriginal senator to give prizes to their children. In 1994, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by Griffith University, if it's okay, John, to mention another university. And he delivered the occasional address. And within the address, he told a story to his audience. He said, "I was a little boy growing up in a humpy just outside of Lismore. And he said, my parents had been given some porridge by the local storekeeper. And he said, as my grandmother was putting it in water to get the weevils out of it, I remembered that white people had porridge with milk. So he said, I ran 2 miles to the dairy farm away from our humpy, and I knocked on the door. And the dairy farmer answered the door, and he said, I looked up at him and I said, guess what? We're having porridge for breakfast. I came to ask if we could have some separated milk. He said, the farmer bellowed at me so loudly I almost fell over. My pigs will get that milk before some little black kid. He said to his audience at Griffith, I'm not telling this story because it's one of cruelty or discrimination. He said, I'm telling you because I want you to know how I came to my goals in life. He said, it was that dairy farmer that set me on my path. When I walked those 2 miles back to the Humpy, I determined from that day I would turn every setback, every adversity, every discomfort, every racial hatred and savagery into a new and determined goal. The year before that, in 1993, Robin Hughes did his biography, and she asked him to nominate his greatest achievement. He said, it is that I was there. They no longer spoke, he said, of bulls or blacks. He said they spoke instead of Aboriginal people. So I said to Bill Kennard, I say to the line of people that come through my office in Westminster when they ask me about it, I say he goes with me everywhere I go to remind me of the 2 things in life that are the most important. The first is the liberating power of even a small amount of education, which too often we who have received it and continue to receive it have a tendency to take for granted. Because it is education more than anything else that will protect us from ideas and attitudes deeply rooted in ignorance and forged on an anvil of prejudice. And the second reason is to remind me that transcending everything in life, rank, power, money, influence, looks, talent, is character. There are periods in human history where it's obvious to see the world has changed. At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the end of the Second World War, it was clear the world would never be the same again. But there are also periods in history where humankind moves from one age to another. And when you're living through it, you don't fully appreciate the scale and the dimension of what's happening. In the late 15th century, over 4 decades, humankind, without a cataclysm, went from one age to another. The formation of nation-states, the splintering of Christendom, the expansion of Europe into the Asias of North America, and the Gutenberg communications revolution. A person who lived in 1480 would not have recognised the world of 1520. We are living through such a period. We are living through the most consequential geopolitical realignment in our lifetime. I say to the 30,000 Boeing employees for whom I have a responsibility, it doesn't matter whether you are 20 or whether you are 66, as I am, screaming to 70. The world into which all of us has been born and in which we have grown up has gone, and it's not coming back. We are living in a world that is one of multipolar disorder, riven by Sino-American rivalry, an increasingly fractious, polarised American political class, resurgent nationalism, populism, interventionist economics, the repudiation of liberal, free, open markets that lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty over the last 30 years and halved infant mortality rates in the last 25 years. And then, of course, transactional geopolitics and many other things. And in all of that, it's easy to think to yourself, well, what difference can I make? And as the social anthropologist Margaret Mead once observed, a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing it ever has. When I did become president of the Australian Medical Association, Daniela, and I was 33 years of age, the young doctors asked me to their national conference, and they asked me to speak on the topic of success. They were less than a decade younger than I was, and I remember looking into the sea of faces and I said, when you work it out, can you let me know? I've got a better idea now. I've resolved that there are 5 things that I think are critically important. Not just these things, but I've distilled them into 5. The first is that you have to have an open mind. You have to have a mind that is open to new ideas, to people that are different and unfamiliar. People who set themselves up for failure do so because they have a closed mind. I worked with people in politics, I work with people now in business, and the other things I've done who have a fixed view of the world, believing that they are right about everything when of course they are not. The second thing is to nurture and protect the inner integrity of your intellect, your ability to think, to formulate ideas. And I often say to the very, very bright young people, particularly the engineers in our company, I say, don't fall into the trap of seeing the world through a straw. You have to be interested in and interesting to the rest of the world, to have an awareness of the broad geopolitical context of the world in which you live and you work, to know what the major shifts in business, in culture and society are, to also recognise that if all of the scientific, engineering and economic problems of life were ever solved, all of the important questions would remain unanswered. The third thing is, as Neville reminds me every day, is character. If you don't know, it derives from the Greek word. It means the impression left in wax by a stone-sill ring. The Greeks called it the stamp of personality. And character is informed by worthwhile intrinsic virtues or values. And the major religions and faiths basically are underwritten by these fundamental values. But it's hard to go past the four that are enshrined in granite at Issuava at the end of the Kokoda Trail. Endurance. You never give up. Sacrifice. A life of value is ultimately one spent in the service of other human beings and being willing to give of yourself to the cause to which you have committed. That thing we call mateship, it's that spirit that binds us as Australians in the face of adversity, no matter what. And courage. Nothing of value that I've seen in life is achieved without taking a risk. Courage is hard to define, but you know it when you see it and when you feel it. It's that spirit that challenges doubt in us. It imposes will, it protects your integrity, it advances values, and ultimately allows us to break through fear. The fourth thing I've concluded is essential is what Graham Davison described in The Uses and Abuses of Australian History, is to imbue yourself with the imaginative capacity to see the world through the eyes of others. Almost all of life's suffering, misery and pain that I've seen comes from people unwilling or unable to see the world through the eyes of someone else. And in a leadership role, I've also learned it's absolutely essential knowing what a person thinks. Like, it's important I know what John thinks. What's much more important is I understand how he thinks. How does a person form his or her worldview? Who and what is shaping their outlook and pressing their buttons? The final thing is, as you get older, I'm getting there, Daniela. As you get older, you realise you go through these, like inside I still feel like I'm 25, but I'm not. But you go through these periods, you go to 18th birthdays, you go to 21st birthdays, you go to engagement parties, you go to buck shows, you go to hens nights, you go to weddings, you go to baby showers, you go to divorce parties. And then as you get older, you find yourself increasingly at funerals. And if you're a certain person, you find yourself giving eulogies for people. And you realise that in the end, none of us is remembered for what we are. All that stuff on the CV that Daniela went through, you missed a lot out, by the way. But you're remembered for who you are, the way that you made other people feel. Judy Searle's here tonight, who was in my year at medical school. I can't tell you who was top of my year. I know it wasn't me. But I can tell you the people who, by their presence and participation, gave my life meaning and purpose through those 6 years that I was at the university. This award, I particularly would like, it's in my name, but I'd really like it to be, and if the extent to which you remember anything I say tonight, I'd like you to remember this. I'd like it to be remembered for another person who graduated from the university who's not here and physically never will be. On the 3rd of June 2017, 3 terrorists weaponised a van on the London Bridge. and their intention was to maim and kill as many people as they possibly could. There was a panicked melee of humanity that ran from the scene of the crime. But one young woman, one young Australian woman, a 28-year-old nurse, Kirsty Bowden, she ran in the opposite direction. A Flinders graduate. Her concern that day was not her own safety and welfare. It was the safety and welfare of other human beings. And her last words, "I'm a nurse, I have to go." She was one of 8 killed that day, fatally stabbed through the chest. And then a year later, the Queen's Commendation for Bravery, 2 years later, the Florence Nightingale Medal. But what really got me was her family went into the Adelaide Advertiser 2 days after her death. And they described her as being selfless, caring and brave. And I read that and I thought, what is it? What is it that makes some men and women amongst us selfless, caring and brave? Genetics, family upbringing, being a part of a community that gives sense and belonging and purpose to your life, an educational framework that's informed by values. In her case, Emmanuel College and Flinders University. And it is that you may or may not realise, those of you who teach at the university now, and those who came before you, and those who will come. But there's something extraordinarily powerful that the university does constantly, and certainly had this impact on me, that whatever I would do with my life and the medical degree which I earned was in some way that I would use it in a way that would make a difference. Initially it was to my patients and then to the broader public health of the community, for which I was subsequently recognised in the leadership of the AMA. But that gift that you instilled not just in Kirsty Bowden, but so many graduates of this university resonate throughout our country and throughout the world. As the great Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote in the 17th century, every human being is an end unto himself and not a means to be used by others. Respect for your own humanity will be found in respect for the humanity of others, and morality is freedom. So to Kirsty Bowden, to the Flinders University, I thank you. There are many people in this room who are far more worthy of this than me, but thank you very much. I feel very privileged and very honoured. Thank you.
What an absolutely beautiful, yes, a standing ovation, thank you. I feel the same. What an absolutely beautiful keynote address. Thank you, Dr. Nelson.